I wanted to make this video because I feel really helpless and hopeless right now about our country, and I think getting my thoughts out there might be therapeutic for me and potentially interesting to anyone who feels similar to me. Before I get into my thoughts, though, I want to present my understanding of the events that have taken place so far. On May 25th, 2020, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, entered a store and purchased a pack of cigarettes with a $20 bill. The employee thought the bill was fake because, quote, the ink was still running, so two employees followed Floyd to his car and demanded he give back the cigarettes, which he refused. The police were then called and told Floyd had passed fake bills, was awfully drunk, and was not in control of himself. Once officers arrived and approached the car, Officer Lane drew his weapon and ordered Floyd to put his hands on the steering wheel, which he did, so he holstered his weapon. After a struggle, Officer Lane pulled Floyd out of the car, handcuffed him, and placed him under arrest. They then walked him across the street to a police car and tried to get him to enter, but he refused. More and more officers arrived at the scene to try to get him in the car, which resulted in Officer Chauvin, a white police officer, pulling a handcuffed Floyd across the back seat from the driver's side to the passenger side and out of the car onto the ground where he laid on the pavement face down. Officer Chauvin then placed his knee on the back of Floyd's neck while two other officers restrained the rest of his body, and a fourth, Officer Tao, prevented onlookers from intervening. Chauvin left his knee on the back of Floyd's neck for a total of 8 minutes and 46 seconds. During this time, Floyd said, "Please, I'm about to die." He said, "I can't breathe," at least 16 times in 5 minutes, and called for his mama, who had been dead for 2 years. During this time, Officer Lane asked Chauvin if they should turn Floyd on his side. Chauvin said no. The final 3 minutes Chauvin had his knee on Floyd's neck, Floyd was motionless. Onlookers begged Officer Tao to check for a pulse, to which he responded by saying, "Don't do drugs." When onlookers began to approach Floyd's motionless body, Officer Chauvin, still with his knee on Floyd's neck, pulled out what seemed to be mace to prevent them from coming closer. The officers made no attempt to revive Floyd, and Chauvin remained on the neck until the ambulance had arrived and the stretcher was placed down behind him. Floyd was pronounced dead shortly after, autopsies showing the cause of death was cardiac arrest during application of neck compression. He was a father of 3. Taking a look at some of these individuals' histories, we find that Officer Chauvin had 18 complaints on his official record, 2 of which ended in discipline from the department, including official letters of reprimand. He had been involved in 3 police shootings, one of which was fatal. He also had worked security at a nightclub where the owner said he had sometimes used over-aggressive tactics when dealing with black clientele, responding to fights by spraying the crowd with mace. Officer Tao had 6 police conduct complaints filed against him, none of which resulting in disciplinary action. In 2014, Officer Tao was accused of brutality when his arrest of an African-American man resulted in the man's broken teeth and hospitalization. The victim said he had been handcuffed without cause and was then thrown to the ground and punched, kicked, kneed, and humiliated. George Floyd was charged with armed robbery in 2007 and in 2009 took a plea deal to be sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. In 2014, Floyd moved to Minnesota. In the aftermath of the death of George Floyd's death, all 4 officers were fired the next day. Almost immediately, demonstrations and protests against the use of excessive force by police officers and lack of police accountability were held globally, with instances of riots, fires, and looting taking place. Floyd's girlfriend asked for the community to respond to his death in a way that honors him, saying, "You can't fight fire with fire. Everything just burns, and I've seen it all day. People hate, they're hating, they're mad, and he would not want that." On May 29th, Chauvin was charged with third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter, and on June 3rd, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison amended Chauvin's charges to include second-degree murder, and the other 3 officers were charged with aiding and abetting second-degree murder. Okay, now I can kind of freestyle off of these bullet points that I have that I wanted to make. So the first thing is that George Floyd had been, charged with armed robbery in the past, and then besides the fact that the choking was the cause of death, he had fentanyl and methamphetamine in his system. And I just want to tell people who are trying to use that as a way to be like, oh, he wasn't completely innocent, that you need to fuck off, because the reason that he died had nothing to do with him robbing somewhere in 2008 or whatever year, 2007, and it had nothing to do with him doing fentanyl and methamphetamine. It has to do with him potentially having a fake $20 bill. For the fake $20 bill, I think it's fucked up that the person who thought it was fake, this all happened because they thought it looked fake. I used to work at Walmart. You're not allowed to just judge whether or not a bill is fake by looking at it. You need to use a pen to make sure that it's real or fake. And then the next thing is that if you do think it's real or fake, call the police and have them deal with it immediately instead of following him out, or call them so that they can come and then verify that it is fake instead of just going off of your word. But then they follow him out, which is ridiculous, and then they tell him to give back the cigarettes. And from working at, in businesses and stuff, if you find a counterfeit, you're not supposed to give it back. And they didn't know whether or not it was counterfeit because it was just from someone looking at it. So they went out there and was like, I guarantee it was, we're going to keep your $20 and you need to give us back your cigarettes because your money's fake. And if I'm George Floyd and I think that my money's not fake, I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to let you keep the money that it either is real because you don't actually test it correctly, or I didn't know that it was fake, so I'm not going to now give you the cigarettes back after I already paid for it, after you already let me leave the store with them. So then the police come and they go to the store, and from the reporting that I've seen, they didn't test it. So they came to respond to a fake $20 bill and then did not test the $20 bill. And then they walk up to George Floyd's car with their guns already out because, fake $20 bills are just deadly. And then they handcuff him, and there's if police officers are trying to arrest me for a fake $20 bill, and it either is a real $20 bill or I don't know if it is a fake $20 bill, I would not just willingly be like, oh yeah, I'm going to let you arrest me now, police officer, especially if I'm a black guy. Next thing, that Officer Tao, his whole job was to prevent intervention, and I'm glad that he did, because when I watched that video, there's something within me that just wants to tackle that guy off of him because it's just so blatant. It's just ridiculous. Yeah, and then Tao also is the guy who, when George Floyd's not moving or breathing or talking anymore, the people tell him, hey, check for a pulse. And when people tell him to check for a pulse, he tells them, don't do drugs, because that's relevant information right now. And I don't understand what everyone's problem is with people who do drugs and how they're less than human and deserve to be murdered. Okay, so now the media keeps talking about looting and riots, and it reminds me too much of Colin Kaepernick's whole situation where he's kneeling to bring attention to Black Lives Matter, and then the media does not talk about Black Lives Matter at all, and then they make it into you hate the military, or this is disrespectful to the military. How about you pay attention to the actual issue instead of talking about bullshit just for the sake of it? And then all of you regular people out there who have all of these things where they're I saw this point where there's a lot of people who are oh, I agree with the movement and stuff, but looting and rioting, that's not good. First of all, congratulations on that point that I've never considered ever before, that looting and rioting is bad. And secondly, we can tell that you are framing it badly because you could do it the other way. You could go, looting and rioting is bad, but what they did to George Floyd was really fucked up. So, Um, Also, I think about society in a weird way because I'm a sociology major, but from my perspective, it's like if you have an unjust, fucked up society, yes, really fucked up stuff is going to start happening. You're going to have people starting to loot, and you're going to have people start rioting, and you're going to have murder. Like, it's going to, like, people don't have money. They're going to start doing some fucked up shit. Okay. I just wanted to call attention to the fact that I think it's interesting that, there are like other issues that are at play that, outside of this police stuff, there are other aspects of our society that are negatively affecting people, especially people of color. And what I'm trying to bring attention to here is that George Floyd lost his job due to the pandemic. And also, I just saw this a couple hours ago when I was writing my notes for this, that apparently he also tested positive for the virus. So all of the stuff that we had been hearing about people of color and communities of color like suffering the most economically from this crisis, and also suffering health wise, and like as in that they're the most susceptible to the virus. He's a prime example of all of it. He got fucked by the police, he got fucked in terms of his health, and he got fucked in terms of economics. And then now I want to call attention to some some people on the spectrum and stuff. So there's this guy named Bob Kroll. He's the president of the Police Officers Federation of Minneapolis. And he called George Floyd a violent criminal, and he called the people who are protesting terrorists. And the Minnesota AFL-CIO president Bill McCarthy criticized Kroll in June 2020 for, quote, a long history of bigoted remarks and complaints of violence made against him toward black residents. So I don't know what the Police Officers Federation is, but it's a little late to be criticizing him. How did you let a guy who apparently had a, quote, long history of bigoted remarks become the president of a police organization? But nothing's wrong, guys. Okay. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have all these politicians who are coming out, and they essentially do this three-part thing. They go, oh, my heart is broken. I forgot where my heart was for a second. Oh, my heart is broken over the George Floyd stuff, and there must be justice, and I call for an investigation. And I'm here to tell everyone that doing an investigation into George Floyd's death is not going to solve the fucking problem that is getting people into the situation where they are fucking dying. We need systemic things. We can't just go, we should investigate that every time someone dies. As a secondary thing, why is it that I only hear about unarmed black men dying and not cops dying? If there was a little bit, I'm not trying to say that I want black people to die and I want cops to die, but all I hear about is civilians dying, and it's like, what if the police are so scared for their life? I'd like to see a story on the news of a police officer dying, so that they're not just unjustifiably being like, oh, I was so scared by this long history of black people not killing police officers, but I'm contributing to the long history now of killing unarmed black people. Okay. And that's why I think we need to disarm the police, because they don't deserve it. They don't deserve to be armed anymore. They need to take that. They need to be de-escalating situations. Anyone should be able to be a police officer. You don't need to be able to be a great marksman to be a police officer. You just need to be talented verbally. Like, you just need to be able to de-escalate situations, use common sense, that kind of stuff. So here's the next thing. So, I think the protests that are going on, there's two components to it. There's one component where they wanted the people who were involved in George Floyd's death to be held accountable. And I don't know what is desired in terms of what charge. I don't know what the end goal is, but now that every officer is charged to a degree, whatever degree of murder it is, they have been charged. Even if they all get the maximum sentence, is the protest over? Like I feel as though you need the systemic change in order to prevent this from happening, and just sending the four officers to jail doesn't fix the problem. So how do we do that? How are we going to get that systemic problem? Because this officer Chauvin was a white guy with his knee on the neck of a black guy. But if it had been a black police officer who had their neck on the back of the black guy, it's equally as fucked up. Like, it's a police issue. It's a racial issue, and then it's also a police issue where they need to be like torn down and rebuilt in a completely different image. Okay, so speaking of policy and how I think policy is the only way forward, we can right off the bat, like, just understand that Trump is not the solution to putting policies in place that is actually going to end this, like, police crisis. Essentially, is what it is. And for those of you out there who want to be like, he released Alice Johnson, he does care. Releasing one, I think all of the nonviolent drug offenders should be released, not just one of them as a token, so that he can walk around and say, I'm not racist. And then besides that, all of the looting will start shooting. We understand how he feels about the protests and that he does not actually want the change. But my question is kind of like, well, we know Biden is better on that issue. Is he going to do any of the systematic change? This is the guy who had, co-sponsored segregationist legislation earlier in his career, and I'm sure that he does not support that anymore. But I'm not convinced that he's going to do anything that's going to be beneficial. Under the Obama administration, and I'm not doing this to be like the whole "what about Trump" person. It's more about it's more of a why I'm so upset with Republicans and Democrats, and just like the establishment in general, was that Obama militarized the police. Like, he increased the funding for the police so that they became more militarized. And I see police militarization as the complete opposite of what I was talking about with society. It's like, if you have civil unrest, they're going to start doing fucked up things. So you can either do policy stuff that helps the people so that there's less unrest, or you can fund the police so that they can have riot shields. You know what I mean? That's my point on that. So this is my, like, hocusy pocusy head in the clouds point that I'm going to make, is that I think the situation that we are in right now, with the health crisis, with the economic crisis, with this racial injustice crisis, this police crisis, we need certain things. We need universal basic income. We need it so that people can have money when there's a crisis, or if you're too old, or if you're like, we should have a UBI. We need Medicare for all. As we've seen, when people lose their jobs, a lot of people's healthcare is tied to their jobs. And now we have all these people. We had millions of people who just got unemployed and now lost their health insurance. And what do they do if they get the virus? Who's making those co-payments and all this kind of stuff? There's that. And then we need to dismantle and rebuild the criminal justice system with an emphasis on racial justice. And the reason that I'm getting at the whole head in the clouds thing is that I really only see one person as able to do all of these things. What I'm getting is that Bernie Sanders seems like he was tailor-made for this moment. Like, his one issue is Medicare for all. I think he's coming around to UBI. I think he would do UBI right now. And his civil rights record is fantastic. So that's why, I don't think that the protests should stop, but I don't see the protests resulting in anything meaningful unless there's a candidate who's actually, or, an elected official, anyone. It could be anyone, Um, but I just don't see anyone that's in the race still, because Joe Biden and Trump are the only people still in it, I guess, um, that are going to do anything. So that's why I looked up the distance from Minneapolis to Milwaukee, because that's where the DNC is, and I'm at a point where it's like I'm gonna just I want to protest the DNC, like, on behalf of all of this stuff that's going on with the Black Lives Matter. It's like, if we want to solve the problems that are plaguing us, we need the politician who's actually going to do it. And to me, that's Bernie Sanders, and not Joe Biden, and not Donald Trump. And then one last extremely fucked up thing that I want to leave in your mind before I go is that as of right now, they still don't know if the bill was fake. So all of this could have been over nothing. It could have been a real $20 bill. And if it was a white guy that walked in there and the ink was looking runny, do you think they might have just passed it off as, oh yeah, I'm sure it got wet, or something? Like, it's just something to think about. Okay, this was set up. I'm Brendan. I didn't make eye contact with the camera for probably a single second because I'm that guy that needs to look around as I talk for inspiration, even though I'm in a closet, essentially. So, thank you.